Imagine spending 50 years building the most dominant career in golf history, and then being told by a court that you cannot use your own name. That is exactly what happened to Jack Nicklaus. At 83 years old, the greatest golfer who ever lived had to sue to prove he was himself. But that legal battle, as absurd and undignified as it was, is only one chapter in a story of grief and loss that the world never fully saw. Because behind the 18 majors, the 66-year marriage, and the famous smile, Jack Nicklaus has been carrying a weight that no trophy could ever soften. And once you know the full story, the image of the perfect golden life cracks completely. The image the world built around Nicklaus was almost too clean to be real. They called him the Golden Bear. He won a record 6 Masters titles, dominated the sport across 3 full decades, and stood as the measuring stick against which every player who followed him was judged. His record of 18 professional majors has stood for over half a century. Tiger Woods came the closest to matching it and never did. The marriage to Barbara, which began in 1960, never cracked. He raised 5 children, and today his family stretches across 24 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. The career ended on his own terms. There was no public scandal, no spectacular fall. That is the version of Jack Nicklaus the world agreed on. A man spared, a man blessed. A man who got everything right and paid no price for it. That version was never the full truth. It was simply the part he allowed the world to see. The hardship in Jack Nicklaus's life did not begin with fame or fortune or a business deal gone wrong. It began in childhood in Columbus, Ohio, in the early 1950s during the height of the American polio epidemic. Young Jack contracted the disease. His case was mild and he recovered, but his younger sister was hit far harder. For a child growing up during an era when polio was paralyzing and killing children across the country, watching that fear move through his own home, watching a sibling suffer from something that had no reliable cure, was a brush with mortality that arrived long before the trophies ever did. It planted something in him early, an understanding that life does not distribute its pain according to who deserves it least. It was the first signal that the perfect life was never going to be quite as perfect as it looked. But to understand the first truly devastating loss in Jack Nicklaus's life, you have to understand Charlie Nicklaus. Charlie was not just Jack's father. He was his best friend, his greatest believer, and the man who put a golf club in his hands in the first place. Charlie, a former athlete, had injured his ankle and took up golf on doctor's orders to rehabilitate it. He brought his 10-year-old son along to the course simply to keep him company. That single act, a father working through his own pain and refusing to go it alone, is the reason the world ever got to know Jack Nicklaus at all. Charlie was a pharmacist in Columbus, a larger-than-life presence in Jack's world, and the two were inseparable. He showed up, he believed. He watched his son chase greatness and never stopped pushing him toward it. And in 1970, Charlie died of cancer at just 56 years old. Jack was devastated in a way the public rarely saw. He later admitted that in the years right before his father's death, he had let himself drift, gotten a little comfortable, a little soft, a little distracted from the relentless drive that had made him great. Losing Charlie shattered him, and it also lit a fire. Grief became fuel. In the wake of his father's death, Jack rededicated himself completely to the game and went on one of the most dominant runs of his entire career through the early 1970s. He won in part to honor the man who would never get to watch him do it again. Every major after 1970 carried the quiet weight of a son trying to make his late father proud. That weight never fully lifted. There are losses that wound, and then there are losses that break something permanently. For the Nicklaus family, that loss came in the early weeks of 2005. Jake Walter Nicklaus was 17 months old. He was born on September 24, 2003, the son of Steve Nicklaus and his wife Krista. On the afternoon of March 1, 2005, at the family's home in North Palm Beach, Florida, little Jake was playing in the hot tub with his 4-year-old brother and their nanny. The three of them left the pool area and went inside the house to change clothes. Jake slipped away unseen. He made his way back through a sliding door to the hot tub where he had been playing, and he fell in. The nanny quickly realized he was missing and found him in the water. She performed CPR until fire rescue workers arrived. He was still breathing when rescuers reached him. He was rushed to Palm Beach Gardens Medical Center. He was pronounced dead at 6:30 p.m. That evening, approximately an hour and a half after rescue workers had first been called. He was a baby. Palm Beach County Sheriff's spokesman Paul Miller confirmed that the death appeared to be accidental and that there was no reason to suspect foul play. A child barrier had been in place around the entire pool area. This was not negligence. It was simply the most horrible kind of accident, the kind that changes a family forever. The obituary the family placed in the Palm Beach Post directed donations to the Nicklaus Children's Health Care Foundation, benefiting the Nicklaus Children's Hospital at St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach, made in memory of Jake Walter Nicklaus. Before the funeral had even taken place, the family had already decided to turn the worst thing that ever happened to them into something that might spare other families the same pain. But the timing of what came next made the grief almost unbearably poignant. Just weeks after Jake's death, Jack was scheduled to play in the Masters, which would be the final Masters appearance of his legendary career. He did not know if he could do it. It was his son Steve, Jake's grieving father, who insisted that his dad go and play, who pushed him to walk those fairways at Augusta one last time. And so Jack Nicklaus said goodbye to the tournament he had won a record 6 times while carrying a fresh and unimaginable sorrow that no gallery could see. That summer at the 2005 Open Championship at St. Andrews, the home of golf, he walked across the Swilcan Bridge and waved farewell to competitive major golf forever. The world saw a storybook ending. What they could not see was everything he was carrying as he crossed that bridge. What the Nicklaus family did next tells you everything about who they are. Their philanthropic work in children's health care expanded enormously in the years following Jake's death. Their name now sits on children's hospitals and pediatric care networks that have helped countless sick children and grieving families. They took the worst thing that ever happened to them and turned it into a mission. But anyone who has lost a child will tell you that no amount of good works ever fills the hole. The death of Jake still haunts Nicklaus' family to this day. And then, just when a man in his 80s might reasonably expect to simply enjoy his legacy in peace, the legal battle began. In 2007, Nicklaus sold equity in Nicklaus Companies to New York-based banker Howard Milstein, who eventually acquired total ownership of the company, including the golf course design business. The deal was worth around $145 million. For years it worked, and then it didn't. Nicklaus largely ended his participation with the company in 2017. His contract included a 5-year non-compete clause, which meant he continued working on behalf of Nicklaus Design until May 2022, but was barred during that period from designing courses on his own outside the company. In late 2022, he began offering course design services through his new company 1JN, operating through his family rather than through Nicklaus Companies. That is when Milstein moved to stop him. Nicklaus Companies filed a lawsuit against the retired golfer, claiming he had been in secret discussions with Saudi Arabia's LAV Golf League on a deal worth $750 million to design golf courses. The company also implied that Nicklaus had stepped down from the board because mental decline was affecting his ability to manage business affairs. Nicklaus denied both claims completely and filed his own defamation lawsuit in Palm Beach County in 2023. Think about what was actually happening. The greatest golfer who ever lived, a man who had spent 50 years building one of the most respected names in the history of sport, was being told by a court that he could not freely use that name in business. A court issued an injunction that barred him from licensing his own name and likeness while the case played out. As one writer put it, this was a man who arguably is golf, fighting in courtrooms just to prove he was himself. He refused to quit because quitting was never in him. In April 2025, a New York court ruled in his favor. Justice Joel M. Cohen confirmed that Nicklaus could design golf courses under his own name and likeness. Nicklaus Companies retained the trademarks and could continue selling Golden Bear apparel and designing courses under the Nicklaus banner, but Jack Nicklaus, the man, was free. Then in October 2025, a Florida jury awarded him $50 million in the defamation case, finding that Nicklaus Companies had made false claims that damaged his reputation. The jury ruled that Milstein and Executive Vice President Andrew O'Brien were not personally liable, but the company itself was. And in March 2026, Jack Nicklaus reacquired Nicklaus Companies outright for $35.7 million through his LLC named 20 Majors. He posted a video message to celebrate. "You may have heard that I've reacquired the businesses of the company I founded over 50 years ago, the Nicklaus Companies. Everything I've done in my career and life has been about family and building a legacy. And today, the Nicklaus Companies are back in the hands of my family and me." The Golden Bear brand came home, but the years spent fighting for his own identity in his 80s remain what they always were, a sad and undignified chapter forced onto one of the most dignified careers the sport has ever known. Beyond the headline losses, there are the quieter ones, the ones that do not make the news but settle in just as deep. In March 2020, before most of the world even understood what was coming, both Jack and Barbara contracted COVID-19. Jack was genuinely ill, like many men his age, He has endured the slow accumulation of a body breaking down, surgeries and replacements, and the quiet daily reminders that even the golden bear is mortal. And perhaps the loneliest part of living so long is watching the world you conquered disappear around you. Arnold Palmer, his greatest rival and one of his dearest friends, is gone. The full generation of players who shared the arena with him through the 1960s and 1970s, the men who understood exactly what that life demanded, have passed away one by one. To be the last man standing from a golden era is its own quiet grief, the kind that does not make headlines but never leaves. So when you look at the full life of Jack Nicklaus, you see something very different from the fairy tale. Yes, he won more majors than anyone. Yes, he has a marriage and a family that most people can only dream of. But he also lost his beloved father far too young, watched polio move through his childhood home, buried a baby grandson in the most heartbreaking of circumstances, and spent his final chapter fighting in court over the right to his own name. The man the world chose as the symbol of the perfect golfing life was carrying as much hidden sorrow as any of the troubled legends we so easily label as tragic. What makes his story quietly heartbreaking is not the losses themselves. It is that he never let the weight of them show, not once. Not publicly, not across 60 years in the spotlight. He carried all of it with a grace and a quietness that made the world believe he had been spared. He never was. He simply refused to let the weight of it show. Today, at 85 years old, Jack Nicklaus is still here, still sharp, still showing up at Augusta each spring to hit the ceremonial opening tee shot, still married to Barbara, still cracking jokes with his grandchildren. He would be the first to count his blessings rather than his sorrows. That is exactly who he is. But that is also what makes his story so worth telling. Because the lesson of Jack Nicklaus is not about majors or records or dominance. It is that there is no such thing as a life without tragedy. Not even for the greatest of all time. Not even for the man who seemed to have everything. The greatest champion golf has ever produced spent a lifetime making the hardest game in the world look easy. It turns out he did the same thing with grief.